Chapter 5. Apprehension and Assent in the Matter of Religion. We are now able to determine what a dogma of faith is and what it is to believe it. A dogma is a proposition. It stands for a notion or for a thing, and to believe it is to give the assent of the mind to it, as it stands for the one or for the other. To give a real assent to it is an act of religion. To give a notional is a theological act. It is discerned, rested in, and appropriated as a reality by the religious imagination. It is held as a truth by the theological intellect. Not as if there were, in fact, or could be, any line of demarcation or party wall between these two modes of assent, the religious and the theological. As intellect is common to all men as well as imagination, every religious man is to a certain extent a theologian, and no theology can start or thrive without the initiative and abiding presence of religion. As in matters of this world, sense, sensation, instinct, intuition supply us with facts, and the intellect uses them. So, as regards our relations with the Supreme Being, we get our facts from the witness, first of nature, then of revelation, and our doctrines, in which they issue, through the exercise of abstraction and inference. This is obvious, but it does not interfere with holding that there is a theological habit of mind and a religious, each distinct from each, religion using theology and theology using religion. This being understood, I propose to consider the dogmas of the being of a God and of the divine Trinity in unity in their relation to assent, both notional and real, and principally to real assent. However, I have not yet finished all I have to say by way of introduction. Now first, my subject is assent and not inference. I am not proposing to set forth the arguments which issue in the belief of these doctrines, but to investigate what it is to believe in them, what the mind does, what it contemplates when it makes an act of faith. It is true that the same elementary facts which create an object for an assent also furnish matter for an inference, and in showing what we believe, I shall unavoidably be in a measure showing why we believe. But this is the very reason that makes it necessary for me at the outset to insist on the real distinction between these two concurring and coincident courses of thought, and to premise by way of caution, lest I should be misunderstood, that I am not considering the question that there is a God, but rather what God is. And secondly, I mean by belief not precisely faith, because faith, in its theological sense, includes a belief, not only in the thing believed, but also in the ground of believing. That is, not only belief in certain doctrines, but belief in them expressly because God has revealed them. But here I am engaged only with what is called the material object of faith, not with the formal, with the thing believed. The Almighty witnesses to himself in Revelation, "We believe that he is one and that he is three, because he says so." We believe also what he tells us about his attributes, his providences and dispensations, his determinations and acts, what he has done and what he will do. And if all this is too much for us, whether to bring before our minds at one time from its variety, or even to apprehend at all, or enunciate from our narrowness of intellect or want of learning, then at least we believe in globo all that he has revealed to us about himself, and that because he has revealed it. However, this, because he says it, does not enter into the scope of the present inquiry, but only the truths themselves, and these particular truths: he is one, he is three, and of these two, both of which are in Revelation, I shall consider he is one, not as a revealed truth, but as, what it is also, a natural truth, the foundation of all religion. And with it I begin.
Section 1. Belief in one God. There is one God, such and such in nature and attributes. I say such and such, for, unless I explain what I mean by one God, I use words which may mean anything or nothing. I may mean a mere anima mundi, or an initial principle which once was in action and now is not, or collective humanity. I speak then of the God of the theist and of the Christian, a God who is numerically one, who is personal, the author, sustainer, and finisher of all things, the life of law and order, the moral governor, one who is supreme and sole, like himself, unlike all things besides himself, which all are but his creatures, distinct from, independent of them all. One who is self-existing, absolutely infinite, who has ever been and ever will be, to whom nothing is past or future, who is all perfection, and the fullness and archetype of every possible excellence, the truth itself, wisdom, love, justice, holiness. One who is all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent, incomprehensible. These are some of the distinctive prerogatives which I ascribe unconditionally and unreservedly to the great being whom I call God. This being what theists mean when they speak of God, their assent to this truth admits without difficulty of being what I have called a notional assent. It is an assent following upon acts of inference and other purely intellectual exercises, and it is an assent to a large development of predicates, correlative to each other, or at least intimately connected together, drawn out as if on paper, as we might map a country which we had never seen, or construct mathematical tables, or master the methods of discovery of Newton or Davy, without being geographers, mathematicians, or chemists ourselves. So far is clear, but the question follows, can I attain to any more vivid assent to the being of a God than that which is given merely to notions of the intellect? Can I enter with a personal knowledge into the circle of truths which make up that great thought? Can I rise to what I have called an imaginative apprehension of it? Can I believe as if I saw? Since such a high assent requires a present experience or memory of the fact, at first sight it would seem as if the answer must be in the negative, for how can I assent as if I saw, unless I have seen? But no one in this life can see God. Yet I conceive a real assent is possible, and I proceed to show how. When it is said that we cannot see God, this is undeniable, but in what sense have we a discernment of His creatures, of the individual beings which surround us? The evidence which we have of their presence lies in the phenomena which address our senses, and our warrant for taking these for evidence is our instinctive certitude that they are evidence. By the law of our nature we associate those sensible phenomena or impressions with certain units, individuals, substances, whatever they are to be called, which are outside and out of the reach of sense, and we picture them to ourselves in those phenomena. The phenomena are as if pictures, but at the same time they give us no exact measure or character of the unknown things beyond them, for who will say there is any uniformity between the impressions which two of us would respectively have of some third thing, supposing one of us had only the sense of touch, and the other only the sense of hearing? Therefore, when we speak of our having a picture of the things which are perceived through the senses, we mean a certain representation, true as far as it goes, but not adequate. And so of those intellectual and moral objects which are brought home to us through our senses, that they exist, we know by instinct that they are such and such, we apprehend from the impressions which they leave upon our minds. Thus the life and writings of Cicero or Dr. Johnson, of St. Jerome or St. Chrysostom, leave upon us certain impressions of the intellectual and moral character of each of them, sui generis, and unmistakable. we take up a passage of Chrysostom or a passage of Jerome, there is no possibility of confusing the one with the other. In each case we see the man in his language. And so of any great man whom we may have known, that he is not a mere impression on our senses, but a real being, we know by instinct that he is such and such, we know by the matter or quality of that impression.
Now certainly the thought of God, as theists entertain it, is not gained by an instinctive association of his presence with any sensible phenomena. But the office which the senses directly fulfill as regards creation, that devolves indirectly on certain of our mental phenomena as regards the Creator. Those phenomena are found in the sense of moral obligation, as from a multitude of instinctive perceptions, acting in particular instances of something beyond the senses, we generalize the notion of an external world, and then picture that world in and according to those particular phenomena from which we started. So, from the perceptive power which identifies the intimations of conscience with the reverberations or echoes, so to say, of an external admonition, we proceed on to the notion of a supreme ruler and judge, and then again we image him and his attributes in those recurring intimations, out of which, as mental phenomena, our recognition of his existence was originally gained. And, if the impressions which his creatures make on us through our senses oblige us to regard those creatures as sui generis, respectively, it is not wonderful that the notices which he indirectly gives us through our conscience of his own nature are such as to make us understand that he is like himself and like nothing else. I have already said I am not proposing here to prove the being of a God. Yet I have found it impossible to avoid saying where I look for the proof of it. For I am looking for that proof in the same quarter as that from which I would commence a proof of his attributes and character, by the same means as those by which I show how we apprehend him, not merely as a notion, but as a reality. The last, indeed, of these three investigations alone concerns me here, but I cannot altogether exclude the two former from my consideration. However, I repeat, what I am directly aiming at is to explain how we gain an image of God and give a real assent to the proposition that he exists. And next, in order to do this, of course, I must start from some first principle. And that first principle, which I assume, and shall not attempt to prove, is that which I should also use as a foundation in those other two inquiries, viz., that we have by nature a conscience. I assume then that conscience has a legitimate place among our mental acts, as really so as the action of memory, of reasoning, of imagination, or as the sense of the beautiful. That, as there are objects which, when presented to the mind, cause it to feel grief, regret, joy, or desire, so there are things which excite in us approbation or blame, and which we in consequence call right or wrong, and which, experienced in ourselves, kindle in us that specific sense of pleasure or pain which goes by the name of a good or bad conscience. This being taken for granted, I shall attempt to show that in this special feeling, which follows on the commission of what we call right or wrong, lie the materials for the real apprehension of a divine sovereign and judge. The feeling of conscience being, I repeat, a certain keen sensibility, pleasant or painful, self-approval and hope, or compunction and fear, attendant on certain of our actions, which in consequence we call right or wrong, is twofold. It is a moral sense and a sense of duty, a judgment of the reason and a magisterial dictate. Of course, its act is indivisible. Still, it has these two aspects, distinct from each other and admitting of a separate consideration. Though I lost my sense of the obligation which I lie under to abstain from acts of dishonesty, I should not in consequence lose my sense that such actions were an outrage offered to my moral nature. Again, though I lost my sense of their moral deformity, I should not therefore lose my sense that they were forbidden to me. Thus, conscience has both a critical and a judicial office, and though its promptings in the breasts of the millions of human beings to whom it is given are not in all cases correct, that does not necessarily interfere with the force of its testimony and of its sanction. Its testimony that there is a right and a wrong, and its sanction to that testimony conveyed in the feelings which attend on right or wrong conduct. Here I have to speak of conscience in the latter point of view, not as supplying us, by means of its various acts, with the elements of morals, such as may be developed by the intellect into an ethical code, but simply as the dictate of an authoritative monitor, bearing upon the details of conduct as they come before us, and complete in its several acts, one by one.
Let us then thus consider conscience, not as a rule of right conduct, but as a sanction of right conduct. This is its primary and most authoritative aspect. It is the ordinary sense of the word. Half the world would be puzzled to know what was meant by the moral sense, but everyone knows what is meant by a good or bad conscience. Conscience is ever forcing on us, by threats and by promises, that we must follow the right and avoid the wrong. So far it is one and the same in the mind of everyone, whatever be its particular errors in particular minds, as to the acts which it orders to be done or to be avoided. And in this respect, it corresponds to our perception of the beautiful and deformed. As we have naturally a sense of the beautiful and graceful in nature and art, though tastes proverbially differ, so we have a sense of duty and obligation, whether we all associate it with the same certain actions in particular or not. Here, however, taste and conscience part company. For the sense of beautifulness, as indeed the moral sense, has no special relations to persons, but contemplates objects in themselves. Conscience, on the other hand, is concerned with persons primarily, and with actions mainly as viewed in their doers, or rather with self alone and one's own actions, and with others only indirectly, and as if in association with self. And further, taste is its own evidence, appealing to nothing beyond its own sense of the beautiful or the ugly, and enjoying the specimens of the beautiful simply for their own sake. But conscience does not repose on itself, but vaguely reaches forward to something beyond self, and dimly discerns a sanction higher than self for its decisions, as is evidenced in that keen sense of obligation and responsibility which informs them. And hence it is that we are accustomed to speak of conscience as a voice, a term which we should never think of applying to the sense of the beautiful, and moreover a voice, or the echo of a voice, imperative and constraining, like no other dictate in the whole of our experience. And again, in consequence of this prerogative of dictating and commanding, which is of its essence, conscience has an intimate bearing on our affections and emotions, leading us to reverence and awe, hope and fear, especially fear. A feeling which is foreign for the most part, not only to taste, but even to the moral sense, except in consequence of accidental associations. No fear is felt by anyone who recognizes that his conduct has not been beautiful, though he may be mortified at himself if perhaps he has thereby forfeited some advantage. But if he has been betrayed into any kind of immorality, he has a lively sense of responsibility and guilt, though the act be no offence against society, of distress and apprehension, even though it may be of present service to him, of compunction and regret, though in itself it be most pleasurable, of confusion of face, though it may have no witnesses. These various perturbations of mind, which are characteristic of a bad conscience, and may be very considerable, self-reproach, poignant shame, haunting remorse, chill dismay at the prospect of the future, and their contraries, when the conscience is good, as real though less forcible, self-approval, inward peace, lightness of heart, and the like. These emotions constitute a specific difference between conscience and our other intellectual senses. Common sense, good sense, sense of expedience, taste, sense of honour, and the like. As indeed they would also constitute between conscience and the moral sense, supposing these two were not aspects of one and the same feeling, exercised upon one and the same subject matter.
So much for the characteristic phenomena which conscience presents, nor is it difficult to determine what they imply. I refer once more to our sense of the beautiful. This sense is attended by an intellectual enjoyment and is free from whatever is of the nature of emotion, except in one case, viz., when it is excited by personal objects. Then it is that the tranquil feeling of admiration is exchanged for the excitement of affection and passion. Conscience, too, considered as a moral sense, an intellectual sentiment, is a sense of admiration and disgust, of approbation and blame. But it is something more than a moral sense. It is always what the sense of the beautiful is only in certain cases. It is always emotional. No wonder then that it always implies what that sense only sometimes implies, that it always involves the recognition of a living object towards which it is directed. Inanimate things cannot stir our affections. These are correlative with persons. If, as is the case, we feel responsibility, are ashamed, are frightened at transgressing the voice of conscience, this implies that there is one to whom we are responsible, before whom we are ashamed, whose claims upon us we fear. If, on doing wrong, we feel the same tearful, broken-hearted sorrow which overwhelms us on hurting a mother, if, on doing right, we enjoy the same sunny serenity of mind, the same soothing, satisfactory delight which follows on our receiving praise from a father, we certainly have within us the image of some person to whom our love and veneration look, in whose smile we find our happiness, for whom we yearn, towards whom we direct our pleadings, in whose anger we are troubled and waste away. These feelings in us are such as require for their exciting cause an intelligent being. We are not affectionate towards a stone, nor do we feel shame before a horse or a dog. We have no remorse or compunction on breaking mere human law. Yet, so it is, conscience excites all these painful emotions: confusion, foreboding, self-condemnation. And on the other hand, it sheds upon us a deep peace, a sense of security, a resignation, and a hope, which there is no sensible, no earthly object to elicit. The wicked flees when no one pursueth. Then why does he flee? Whence his terror? Who is it that he sees in solitude, in darkness, in the hidden chambers of his heart? If the cause of these emotions does not belong to this visible world, the object to which his perception is directed must be supernatural and divine. And thus the phenomena of conscience, as a dictate, avail to impress the imagination with the picture of a supreme governor, a judge, holy, just, powerful, all-seeing, retributive, and is the creative principle of religion, as the moral sense is the principle of ethics. And let me here refer again to the fact, to which I have already drawn attention, that this instinct of the mind, recognizing an external master in the dictate of conscience, and imaging the thought of him in the definite impressions which conscience creates, is parallel to that other law of, not only human, but of brute nature, by which the presence of unseen individual beings is discerned under the shifting shapes and colours of the visible world. Is it by sense or by reason that brutes understand the real unities, material and spiritual, which are signified by the lights and shadows, the brilliant, ever-changing kaleidoscope, as it may be called, which plays upon their retina? Not by reason, for they have not reason. Not by sense, because they are transcending sense. Therefore, it is an instinct. This faculty on the part of brutes, unless we were used to it, would strike us as a great mystery. It is one peculiarity of animal natures to be susceptible of phenomena through the channels of sense. It is another to have in those sensible phenomena a perception of the individuals to which this or that group of them belongs. This perception of individual things amid the maze of shapes and colours which meets their sight is given to brutes in large measures, and that, apparently, from the moment of their birth. It is by no mere physical instinct, such as that which leads him to his mother for milk, that the new-dropped lamb recognises each of his fellow lambkins as a whole, consisting of many parts bound up in one, and, before he is an hour old, makes experience of his and their rival individualities. And much more distinctly do the horse and dog recognise even the personality of their masters.
How are we to explain this apprehension of things, which are one and individual, in the midst of a world of pluralities and transmutations, whether in the instance of brutes or again of children? But until we account for the knowledge which an infant has of his mother or his nurse, what reason have we to take exception at the doctrine, as strange and difficult, that in the dictate of conscience, without previous experiences or analogical reasoning, he is able gradually to perceive the voice, or the echoes of the voice, of a master, living, personal, and sovereign? I grant, of course, that we cannot assign a date, ever so early, before which he had learned nothing at all, and formed no mental associations, from the words and conduct of those who have the care of him. But still, if a child of 5 or 6 years old, when reason is at length fully awake, has already mastered and appropriated thoughts and beliefs in consequence of their teaching, in such sort as to be able to handle and apply them familiarly, according to the occasion, as principles of intellectual action. Those beliefs at the very least must be singularly congenial to his mind, if not connatural with its initial action. And that such a spontaneous reception of religious truths is common with children, I shall take for granted, till I am convinced that I am wrong in so doing. The child keenly understands that there is a difference between right and wrong, and when he has done what he believes to be wrong, he is conscious that he is offending one to whom he is amenable, whom he does not see, who sees him. His mind reaches forward with a strong presentiment to the thought of a moral governor, sovereign over him, mindful, and just. It comes to him like an impulse of nature to entertain it. It is my wish to take an ordinary child, but still one who is safe from influences destructive of his religious instincts. Supposing he has offended his parents, he will all alone and without effort, as if it were the most natural of acts, place himself in the presence of God, and beg of him to set him right with them. Let us consider how much is contained in this simple act. First, it involves the impression on his mind of an unseen being with whom he is in immediate relation, and that relation so familiar that he can address him whenever he himself chooses. Next, of one whose goodwill towards him he is assured of, and can take for granted, nay, who loves him better, and is nearer to him than his parents. Further, of one who can hear him wherever he happens to be, and who can read his thoughts, for his prayer need not be vocal. Lastly, of one who can effect a critical change in the state of feeling of others towards him. That is, we shall not be wrong in holding that this child has in his mind the image of an invisible being, who exercises a particular providence among us, who is present everywhere, who is heart-reading, heart-changing, ever accessible, open to impenetrable. What a strong and intimate vision of God must he have already attained, if, as I have supposed, an ordinary trouble of mind has the spontaneous effect of leading him for consolation and aid to an invisible personal power. Moreover, this image brought before his mental vision is the image of one who by implicit threat and promise commands certain things which he, the same child, coincidentally, by the same act of his mind, approves, which receive the adhesion of his moral sense and judgment, as right and good. It is the image of one who is good, inasmuch as enjoining and enforcing what is right and good, and who, in consequence, not only excites in the child hope and fear, nay, it may be added, gratitude towards him, as giving a law and maintaining it by reward and punishment, but kindles in him love towards him, as giving him a good law, and therefore as being good himself, for it is the property of goodness to kindle love, or rather the very object of love is goodness, and all those distinct elements of the moral law, which the typical child, whom I am supposing, more or less consciously loves and approves, truth, purity, justice, kindness, and the like, are but shapes and aspects of goodness. And having in his degree a sensibility towards them all, for the sake of them all he is moved to love the lawgiver, who enjoins them upon him. And, as he can contemplate these qualities and their manifestations under the common name of goodness, he is prepared to think of them as indivisible, correlative, supplementary of each other in one and the same personality, so that there is no aspect of goodness which God is not, and that the more, because the notion of a perfection embracing all possible excellences, both moral and intellectual, is especially congenial to the mind, and there are in fact intellectual attributes, as well as moral, included in the child's image of God, as above represented.
Such is the apprehension which even a child may have of his sovereign lawgiver and judge. which is possible in the case of children, because at least some children possess it, whether others possess it or no, and which, when it is found in children, is found to act promptly and keenly by reason of the paucity of their ideas. It is an image of the good God, good in himself, good relatively to the child, with whatever incompleteness, an image before it has been reflected on, and before it is recognized by him as a notion. Though he cannot explain or define the word God, when told to use it, his acts show that to him it is far more than a word. He listens indeed with wonder and interest to fables or tales. He has a dim, shadowy sense of what he hears about persons and matters of this world. But he has that within him which actually vibrates, responds, and gives a deep meaning to the lessons of his first teachers about the will and the providence of God. How far this initial religious knowledge comes from without, and how far from within, how much is natural, how much implies a special divine aid which is above nature, we have no means of determining, nor is it necessary for my present purpose to determine. I am not engaged in tracing the image of God in the mind of a child or a man to its first origins, but showing that he can become possessed of such an image, over and above all mere notions of God, and in what that image consists. Whether its elements, latent in the mind, would ever be elicited without extrinsic help is very doubtful. But whatever be the actual history of the first formation of the divine image within us, so far at least is certain that, by informations external to ourselves, as time goes on, it admits of being strengthened and improved. It is certain too that whether it grows brighter and stronger, or, on the other hand, is dimmed, distorted, or obliterated, depends on each of us individually and on his circumstances. It is more than probable that, in the event, from neglect, from the temptations of life, from bad companions, or from the urgency of secular occupations, the light of the soul will fade away and die out. Men transgress their sense of duty and gradually lose those sentiments of shame and fear, the natural supplements of transgression, which, as I have said, are the witnesses of the unseen judge. And even were it deemed impossible that those who had in their first youth a genuine apprehension of him could ever utterly lose it, yet that apprehension may become almost undistinguishable from an inferential acceptance of the great truth, or may dwindle into a mere notion of their intellect. On the contrary, the image of God, if duly cherished, may expand, deepen, and be completed with the growth of their powers and in the course of life, under the varied lessons, within and without them, which are brought home to them concerning that same God, one and personal, by means of education, social intercourse, experience, and literature. To a mind thus carefully formed upon the basis of its natural conscience, the world, both of nature and of man, does but give back a reflection of those truths about the one living God, which have been familiar to it from childhood. Good and evil meet us daily as we pass through life, and there are those who think it philosophical to act towards the manifestations of each with some sort of impartiality, as if evil had as much right to be there as good, or even a better, as having more striking triumphs and a broader jurisdiction. And because the course of things is determined by fixed laws, they consider that those laws preclude the present agency of the Creator in the carrying out of particular issues, It is otherwise with the theology of a religious imagination. It has a living hold on truths which are really to be found in the world, though they are not upon the surface. It is able to pronounce by anticipation what it takes a long argument to prove, that good is the rule and evil the exception. It is able to assume that, uniform as are the laws of nature, they are consistent with a particular providence. It interprets what it sees around it by this previous inward teaching as the true key of that maze of vast, complicated disorder, and thus it gains a more and more consistent and luminous vision of God from the most unpromising materials.
Thus, conscience is a connecting principle between the creature and his creator, and the firmest hold of theological truths is gained by habits of personal religion. When men begin all their works with the thought of God, acting for His sake and to fulfill His will, when they ask His blessing on themselves and their life, pray to Him for the objects they desire, and see Him in the event, whether it be according to their prayers or not, they will find everything that happens tend to confirm them in the truth about Him which live in their imagination, varied and unearthly as those truths may be. Then they are brought into His presence as that of a living person, and are able to hold converse with Him, and that with a directness and simplicity, with a confidence and intimacy, mutatis mutandis, which we use towards an earthly superior, so that it is doubtful whether we realize the company of our fellow men with greater keenness than these favored minds are able to contemplate and adore the unseen, incomprehensible Creator. This vivid apprehension of religious objects, on which I have been enlarging, is independent of the written records of revelation. It does not require any knowledge of Scripture, nor of the history or the teaching of the Catholic Church. It is independent of books. But if so much may be traced out in the twilight of natural religion, it is obvious how great an addition in fullness and exactness is made to our mental image of the divine personality and attributes by the light of Christianity. And indeed, to give us a clear and sufficient object for our faith is one main purpose of the supernatural dispensations of religion. This purpose is carried out in the written word, with an effectiveness which inspiration alone could secure, first, by the histories which form so large a portion of the Old Testament, and scarcely less impressively in the prophetical system, as it is gradually unfolded and perfected in the writings of those who were its ministers and spokesmen. And as the exercise of the affections strengthens our apprehension of the object of them, it is impossible to exaggerate the influence exerted on the religious imagination by a book of devotions so sublime, so penetrating, so full of deep instruction as the Psalter, to say nothing of other portions of the hagiographer. And then, as regards the New Testament, the Gospels, from their subject, contain a manifestation of the divine nature, so special as to make it appear from the contrast as if nothing were known of God, when they are unknown. Lastly, the apostolic epistles, the long history of the Church, with its fresh exhibitions of divine agency, the lives of the saints, and the reasonings, internal collisions, and decisions of the theological school, form an extended comment on the words and works of our Lord. I think I need not say more in illustration of the subject which I proposed for consideration in this section. I have wished to trace the process by which the mind arrives, not only at a notional, but at an imaginative or real assent to the doctrine that there is one God, that is, an assent made with an apprehension, not only of what the words of the proposition mean, but of the object denoted by them. Without a proposition or thesis, there can be no assent, no belief, at all, any more than there can be an inference without a conclusion. The proposition that there is one personal and present God may be held in either way, either as a theological truth or as a religious fact or reality. The notion and the reality assented to are represented by one and the same proposition, but serve as distinct interpretations of it. When the proposition is apprehended for the purposes of proof, analysis, comparison, and the like intellectual exercises, it is used as the expression of a notion. When for the purposes of devotion, it is the image of a reality. Theology, properly and directly, deals with notional apprehension, religion with imaginative.
Here we have the solution of the common mistake of supposing that there is a contrariety and antagonism between a dogmatic creed and vital religion. People urge that salvation consists not in believing the propositions that there is a God, that there is a Saviour, that our Lord is God, that there is a Trinity, but in believing in God, in a Saviour, in a Sanctifier. And they object that such propositions are but a formal and human medium, destroying all true reception of the gospel and making religion a matter of words or of logic, instead of its having its seat in the heart. They are right so far as this, that men can and sometimes do rest in the propositions themselves as expressing intellectual notions. They are wrong when they maintain that men need do so or always do so. The propositions may and must be used, and can easily be used, as the expression of facts, not notions, and they are necessary to the mind in the same way that language is ever necessary for denoting facts, both for ourselves as individuals and for our intercourse with others. Again, they are useful in their dogmatic aspect as ascertaining and making clear for us the truths on which the religious imagination has to rest. Knowledge must ever precede the exercise of the affections. We feel gratitude and love. We feel indignation and dislike when we have the informations actually put before us which are to kindle those several emotions. We love our parents as our parents when we know them to be our parents. We must know concerning God before we can feel love, fear, hope, or trust towards Him. Devotion must have its objects. Those objects, as being supernatural, when not represented to our senses by material symbols, must be set before the mind in propositions. The formula, which embodies a dogma for the theologian, readily suggests an object for the worshipper. It seems a truism to say, yet it is all that I have been saying, that in religion the imagination and affections should always be under the control of reason. Theology may stand as a substantive science, though it be without the life of religion. But religion cannot maintain its ground at all without theology. Sentiment, whether imaginative or emotional, falls back upon the intellect for its stay, when sense cannot be called into exercise. And it is in this way that devotion falls back upon dogma.